This episode is sponsored by CyberGhost VPN. With over 36 million users worldwide, CyberGhost is one of the leading VPN providers in the world. And let me just tell you, I'm sure they will go down in history. With CyberGhost VPN, you can camouflage your IP address and all your data gets encrypted. This lets you be anonymous with no one else knowing what you do online. Not even CyberGhost VPN themselves, because they keep no logs. You can use CyberGhost VPN to keep hackers and spammers at bay, protect your digital identity, stay safe on Wi-Fi networks, keep your browsing history clean, and much more. What we love best is the fact that CyberGhost VPN helps you bypass geo restrictions. This way you can access all the content from over 35 streaming platforms. For example, with CyberGhost VPN, I can watch all the history documentaries on platforms like Netflix US, BBC UK, or Amazon Prime with just the push of a button. CyberGhost VPN gives you access to over 6,200 VPN servers located in 90 countries. One CyberGhost VPN subscription lets you protect up to 7 devices at the same time, and their apps are super easy to set up and to use, and they have friendly 24/7 customer support. Use our link in the description to get CyberGhost VPN now for just $2.75 a month. And with a 45-day money-back guarantee, everything is completely risk-free for you. Jacob Nacken, the giant German soldier. World War II. Jacob Nathan was born in 1906 in Dusseldorf, Germany. It was not surprising that he grew up to be incredibly tall, as both his mother and father were over 6 feet tall. In fact, tallness seemed to run in the family. Jacob's younger sister and brother both grew up to be over 6 feet, and his older brother was a massive 6 foot 7 inches. Jacob grew to be the true giant of the family, growing to a colossal 7 foot 3 inches, though some newspapers would claim his true height was nearer to 7 foot 8. When Jacob was a teenager, there was mass unemployment in post-World War I Germany. After World War I, Germany was forced to pay for the material losses, which threw the country into a violent economic crisis. So young Jacob took advantage of his unique appearance to find a job in the show business and leave the country, traveling with a German traveling circus around Europe. At first, he was known by the stage name of Uranus, after the Greek god of the sky. But then he was more and more billed as the giant from the Rhineland, and would spend nearly the next 20 years traveling all over Europe, often headlining as Germany's tallest man. He married a 5 foot 8 inch tall girl from Belgium and seemed to be content with his minor celebrity status as a comical curiosity attraction in a circus show. He was often dressed as a cowboy or gentleman in a top hat and tails for the crowd's amusement in his shows, and he was accompanied by a child dressed as an adult in order to exaggerate his height even further. Nakan would have to wear size 17 boots as an adult and would constantly get bruises on his head from hitting the tops of doorways. But in 1939, Jacob cut short his visit to the New York Trade Fair, a year-long event showcasing the finest in business innovation, and returned home to join the army as Germany prepared to go to war. Like many Germans at the time, he returned from abroad out of patriotism rather than ideology. There's no proof that Jacob was ever a Nazi or agreed with their radical views. Once he joined the German army, he officially became their tallest soldier. By this time, he was 34 years old, which was considered to be too old at the start of the war for frontline service in the infantry. So he was assigned to an anti-tank crew and spent the war doing garrison duty, far away from the action. He never saw frontline service during those years, so his biggest challenge was to find a pair of trousers that fit him. But in the summer of 1944, he found himself stationed on the defensive line surrounding the strategically important French port of Calais. The reason this port was so important was that it was only around 21 miles from the English coastline, and therefore the most obvious point for any Allied invasion of Europe. When D-Day began on June 6th along the shoreline of Normandy, several hundred miles away, Hitler first thought it was a trick and that the real invasion would still happen at Calais. In fact, the Allies encouraged Hitler into believing this through a series of deceptions and Operation Bodyguard. So Jacob remained in the heavily fortified bunkers waiting for an attack that never happened. A month later, he and his anti-tank crew found themselves, along with the rest of the Calais garrison, cut off and surrounded by the Allied forces. Jacob's units surrendered without a fight to an advancing Canadian brigade. Ironically, he was pictured surrendering to a corporal named Eldon Bob Roberts, who was just 5 foot 3 inches tall. This made headline news in both American and British newspapers and newsreels at the time, as Jacob towered over the Canadian soldier who was a full 2 feet smaller than him, It was only in 2010 that the giant man in the photograph was identified as being Jacob Nacken. Jakob was subsequently sent to Britain as a prisoner of war, where he remained for over a year. After being found to have no involvement in any war crimes, and with the war being over, he was released. He returned to his hometown of Dusseldorf in Germany, but not to the family home as it had been destroyed in an Allied bombing raid during the war. Thankfully, none of his family had been killed. He spent the next 4 years doing various jobs, including work as a receptionist in the local British Officers Club. But in 1949, he and his wife decided to leave Germany and immigrated to America, where most of his family had gone to live. He was sponsored by his father's employer there, a local car dealership, and at first lived with his sister in New Jersey, who had moved there just after the war. He was keen to get back into circus life and got himself a job with an American traveling circus, where he was wrongly billed as the tallest man in the world. But now Jakob was in his mid-40s and was disillusioned with circus life, complaining about the long hours and being away for extended periods from his wife, who had stayed behind in their apartment in New York. So he left the circus after just 1 season and started a new job as a novelty Santa Claus. Now he was advertised as being the tallest Santa in the world. Jakob then went on to appear on several television shows and made a living under the stage name of Germany's Long Jake for the next 10 years. His last engagement was starring in the Broadway version of Ripley's Believe It or Not. Then he chose to retire from show business at the age of 53. Though he did still occasionally make public appearances. For instance, in 1961, Jakob dressed in the white uniform and hat of a chef, helping a department store celebrate its anniversary sale by serving free food to customers. Jakob later returned to Germany and lived to the ripe old age of 81, dying in 1987. This may have been surprising because of his height. Though Jakob was incredibly tall, he was not by far the tallest man. This title officially belonged to an American called Robert Wadlow from Missouri. He was as tall as Jakob by the time he was 13.